Welcome back to Tide Pod. Jack, Tony, and Brandon back again and back talking about the now SEC champion Alabama Crimson Tide knocking off Georgia 27-24 in the title game. We're going to get to the playoff in a minute. Let's recap the game first because I know, Alabama was able to do what they needed to do to make the playoff, and we had a lot of debate about that. And I do want to talk about, just our, how surprised we were to see them as that number 4 team, all that stuff. We'll get into that. Let's recap the game first and foremost, though, gents. It was a great game from Alabama, obviously pulling out the win. We all predicted Alabama to win. I think we all predicted within the relative, at least, point differential. I think we were all within at least like 7 or 3. So good on us for being right first and foremost. But just broad takeaways. What impressed you guys about Alabama's SEC championship W?
If it wasn't for them running out the clock at the end, they were like in field goal range. So my 30-24 prediction was like almost there. But no, look, you watch that game and you watch the beginning of it and you think, oh my gosh, Alabama's going to be, they're dead. They went 3 and out, and then Georgia comes and runs it right down their throat, and you're just starting to think like, oh my gosh, like this is going to be, a tough game for Alabama. And then all of a sudden, things start to snap. The defense comes back, and you got a few, big plays. They have to settle for a field goal. But I think the turning point in the game was that 4th down, the pass to Bond. You catch that, you get a touchdown, you go up by 10 at the half, and then that really allowed Alabama to have the momentum in this game. And and from then it was just more. They didn't really play as good in the second half, but I think it was more just holding on and doing the things you needed to win against a really good Georgia team. But let's face it, if we were doing the playoffs just by, who could win it, I think you would put this Georgia team in there. It's just a really good team.
Yeah, I said my takeaways from the game were that it was just a dominant performance by Alabama from start to finish. It seemed like there was points in time where Georgia was going to make a push. But really, once Alabama got a stranglehold on the game, it was theirs for the taking. Milroe with his legs was darn near unstoppable. The only time they really stopped was kind of like stopping themselves or a couple of unique plays, unique calls by the referees. But, for my take, even without Jason there, to find Georgia on busted coverages and for him to take advantage of that, and then, for even him to find Jermaine Burton across the middle against Everett, who's been getting beat all year, to take advantage of that mismatch and give Burton the opportunity to pass Georgia his flowers. It was just a dominant performance, and really there were points in time in the game where Alabama was really, at points in time, really running away with the game. Like Georgia had to score on the 4th down on the goal line. If they don't get that, there's even the drive before that where Alabama could have taken more advantage. So all in all, it was just Alabama's for the taking, and Georgia just didn't come to play, and Alabama took full advantage and stepped up to the plate.
I think if I have the stat right, I think, Jalen Milroe has only had one turnover since the beginning of the month, or since the beginning of November. I think that's true. I mean, that's another big takeaway as well. You talked about the plays he made with his legs, and he did, Brandon, when he needed to make plays and get first downs, especially on that final drive to kill the clock. But I think the biggest thing that Jalen Milroe did, if you look at his stats, they're really not that special, but he didn't turn the ball over, and he just made the plays that he needed to at the right time. And he's kind of really just changed. I think it's a maturity thing. It's crazy how much he's just matured over the last month. But we're not seeing a guy that's he's making good decisions. He's not, forcing passes. So I think that's key. There were some times where, like you said, it felt like Alabama was going to run away with it, but they never actually did. And I think as in control maybe as Alabama was at some times, all it takes is a turnover to really just have things snowball. And they couldn't afford to do that. And he didn't have one. I think that was huge.
Yeah, I think it was the prevention of mistakes. I think you make a good point. To clarify on that stat, he did have 1 pick against Kentucky on November 11th, but other than that, his last pick before that was against Tennessee back in October. So yeah, the lone turnover since that game, you're right, is very impressive for a guy who in this team, I mean, that's what you kind of knew you needed to do, is just kind of do your job. Saban said that all season long. If everyone takes care of business, knows their role, does their job, they have enough firepower to beat this year's Georgia team, and that's what they did. Brandon, like you said, I think a lot of credit has to go to the running game too without Jace McClellan in there. Roydell Williams, 64 yards, a touchdown on 16 carries. I thought he was good. Again, just did his job, nothing spectacular, but again, you just needed somebody to step up, and he knew he was going to be the guy they would turn to do that, and he did. And I think you have to give him a lot of credit. Beck wasn't even that bad in this game, completed 243 yards, 21 completions total. But I think this Alabama team just did enough and ends up making the college football playoff. Come Sunday, obviously, Bama fans were probably sweating it out, as were Florida State fans. Maybe not as much Texas fans, at least when they were interviewing. I know like Sark and all them, they seemed pretty confident they were going to get in, but we knew once this result came through that someone was going to be left disappointed. Unfortunately for Alabama, it was not that team. It ended up being Florida State. We can put to rest any of the discussions, I guess, other than, I think we should touch on the decision and the committee choosing to do that. I know obviously for our coverage standpoint, for our fan base's standpoint, it's beneficial to see Alabama in the playoff. And certainly, this was a unique year where they certainly were one of the 4 teams that deserve to be in. Florida State, maybe so as well. But again, the team without their starting quarterback, they leave out. What was your guys' thoughts on just Sundays, sweating it out, waiting for the playoff to come in, and then seeing Alabama in at that 4 slot?
Yeah, it's going to make for a better playoff. We already saw Florida State versus Michigan in the Big Ten championship game when Iowa was playing the role of Florida State, just because you have an elite defense with no offense. I mean, after you saw Florida State struggle against Florida, you thought, okay, maybe it's, their first full game without Travis, how are they, maybe they're just a little bit shook. And then they looked even just worse against Louisville. I mean, it was just a totally inept showing on offense. And you're just like, how is this team going to beat one of the best defenses in college football in Michigan? It was going to be a slaughter, and it was going to be a game that nobody wanted to see. It stinks for Florida State that they didn't get put in the playoff because they did go undefeated. But, putting a handicap guy in the 100-meter, dash in the Olympics is not, are you really doing him any favors? I mean, like you're putting him in the thing that they cannot win with the team that they have. So whether they deserved it, or not. And so I think that the committee, made the right choice in putting in an Alabama because, Alabama did have a good resume, had a spot that they did deserve to be a top 4 team. I think there's probably more than 4 teams that deserve to be in the playoff. I think we can say that. But I think, not only that with Alabama, they're the deserving team, they're also a team that can win it. And we're looking to find the best team. And, without Jordan Travis, Florida State's just not that. And, it really is unfortunate for them. But that's one of the, criteria that the committee has is that, if you lose a star player that alters the team, that you're supposed to factor that in. So the committee did its job. I'm a big, we don't need the committee, just put it in computers. But this is actually the reason why you do have a committee is so that if there's injuries or stuff that a computer can't account for, the committee can step in, and it did its job. And I do not like the committee. I think the whole college football playoff can be a real sham at times, and I totally understand Florida State's frustration, but I do think the committee did its job on this occasion.
Yeah, I think you spoke soundly for Florida State. I'll just go ahead and go to what happened at the Big 12 championship. I was wrong, obviously. The Oklahoma State team that I hadn't hoped for showed up, and well, Ollie Gordon at halftime was screaming and crying, and Texas was well on their way. So that definitely took care of one of those spots. But, I actually had Texas between 10 and 12 wins going into the year, and they hit that 12th win. I do hope that falls short against Washington, but who knows? They may be looking at a repeat, soon here. But, for me, whenever I was just watching the games across the board on Saturday, to see Alabama take care of business, that was big. To see the Texas one take care of itself, And then the kind of the night games, pay attention to one, was Iowa going to score points? Once I saw at halftime it was 10-0, I kind of knew that game was over. And then Florida State, to see them pull out the win but struggle, it kind of compounded the fact that, hey, this team can't get it done, at least on the large scale, without Jordan Travis. So, I just expected more from them just offensively to be able to carry it without him. But they didn't. And, on Sunday when I woke up and saw that Alabama one got Michigan, and to see, kind of how Michigan responded, it said all that I need to know myself that, this may be a long playoff run.
Yeah, I'm glad you hit on that. That was the viral moment for me of seeing Michigan's reaction. How you're getting a camera in there to document the reaction of who a team is playing is shocking to me that footage got out of there, but that was pretty funny.
Well, it's supposed to be a moment, right? They're supposed to be excited. They're supposed to, just see the matchup. It's kind of like, when you have the number one team watch the number one seed watch the NCAA tournament. Like, they know they're going to be a number one seed, but like seeing it is, that's what that reaction was probably for. I don't blame Michigan, right? You go from playing like a lame duck Florida State team that you're just gonna, you could put the backup some of the backups in and beat them without Jordan Travis, and then you go from that to playing who I'd have to say is probably the favorite now in Alabama. So I mean, it's like, well, what a switch in emotions right there. It goes from being I would say, I would probably favor Michigan over Florida State by at least 17 points. And now I think by the time I think Michigan was a 2-point favorite over Alabama, but with all the money coming in with Alabama, I think by the time that game kicks off, Alabama will be the favorite in that game. So yeah, it's just, I don't really blame them for that reaction, because they would have basically had a free spot in the college football national championship game if the committee had chose Florida State.
Yeah, I just think it's, you're right. You kind of echo a lot of people saying maybe this shows why it was the right decision to include Alabama. I think the take that I've rested on about this is, for so long, I think the committee would say we're putting the best 4 teams in, and then more often than not put at least 3 of the 4 most deserving teams in from the season. And if you want to lean into that argument, then yeah, Florida State won all its games. There you go. Maybe most deserving. They found a way, but are they one of the best 4 teams? I don't think they're even probably better than Georgia. I would heavily favor the Bulldogs in their bowl game. But yeah, I think they ultimately went with the right decision. I don't really believe the fact that they don't think about TV ratings. I think I saw some number that they're going to make so much more money with Bama in there and all that stuff. So I definitely think that comes into play a little bit, whether they want to say it does or not. And yeah, the Michigan reaction, again, kind of sums it up the best. Brandon, I'm glad. I appreciate you taking ownership for the Oklahoma State take. That was, the Texas came to play in that game, but
well, no, Oklahoma State doesn't want to follow the recipe for success. They gave Ollie the ball 13 times. They gave the ball on the first 2 drives. They gave it to him 1 time. I knew at that point it's like, okay,
yeah.
We tried to tell you that.
So,
that's feed the beast.
They were trash. They are trash. Yeah. They lost 45 to Central Florida.
Confusing coaching.
This was a trash team doing trash football things.
Yeah.
It should have been a blown pass interference call.
Yeah.
And I still wouldn't have picked Oklahoma to beat Texas, but at least they would have given them a shot.
They would have given them something more. They would have played with a little bit more pride. Yes, agreed. Agreed.
Getting into this a little bit, and I know, we're going to have some shows obviously before, this all kicks off, but you mentioned that line, Tony. It's currently Michigan's favored by 1.5. ESPN's matchup predictor gives the Wolverines a 55.9% chance to win the game in Pasadena. Obviously, a lot can still change with it being, around a month, a little less than a month from kickoff for that game. But Tony, even just in covering, this team and seeing this Alabama team in playoff situations and stuff, how does Saban kind of prepare his guys for when who your opponent's going to be? You have way longer to prepare than you would on a week-to-week basis. What does that preparation maybe kind of look like there as you get ready for that game in Pasadena?
I think he's been very careful to not overdo it and not over prepare for a season for a team. So, I think sometimes they kind of almost work on themselves a little bit and then treat it like, I just think that you can, if you hyper focus everything on Michigan every single day, I think you can overkill it and then just kind of like psych yourself up and just be almost, I don't know if there's such thing as being too prepared, but you could be too focused on just this specific opponent when you're really used to doing that. So there's a little bit of a balance between when to really start ramping it up for Michigan, and Nick Saban usually does a pretty good job of that. I think for Alabama, this next few weeks will be just getting healthy. I mean, we talked about Jason McClellan being out for the SEC championship game. Get him back. I think Riddell got a little bit banged up in that game. There was a few people that were playing in that game that were a little bit banged up. So, getting all those guys healthy, it's late in the season, so you're always going to have injuries. From here on out, there'll be players playing injured. But that's on all four teams. Making sure all your notable guys are as fresh as they can be, I think will be big. And then keeping the team, with the right mental state. I think when you have these layoffs, if you don't have a mentally strong team, this is where, you can kind of get too ahead of yourself. Maybe you could feel too accomplished by making the playoff. I mean, Alabama, had to prove people wrong time and time again. Every week they weren't moving up in the rankings, and you can kind of rally behind that. Well, now you finally got in, and now people think that, they did you a favor. I think what Nick Saban's trying to do. And, we actually published a story where he had his phone his number leaked, and, he's getting calls from Florida State fans. I'm going to go ahead and believe Nick Saban, but who's to say he's not lying about that just to get, his team pumped up? He needs to find reasons to get them that, oh, look, people still don't believe in you. And even in his quote that we got from the video from that banquet, he said, well, there's still naysayers. There's still people that don't think that you belong. So he's going to use everything he can, whether it's, actual prank calls, like maybe fake prank calls, depending on who you want to ask. I think he'll get them motivated. The good thing about this Alabama team from an Alabama standpoint is just they're so mentally strong. I think this is the team that really bought in. And that's why you've seen people like Jalen Milroe improve and, just like the struggles that they've overcome in the offensive line. I think it just is a team that realized it's a work in progress and then just kept on plugging away and really just did everything Nick Saban asked of it. Honestly, this could be Nick Saban's best coaching job, in his whole career. Which is saying a lot because he's had a lot of title-winning teams. But I think this team is in a good position to handle everything mentally. And like I said, I feel like they're the best team in the playoff right now from a talent standpoint. So if they got that and they got the mental side of it, I think they've got a really good shot at earning a title this year.
Definitely. Brandon, you have a take on that? Do you think this is Nick Saban's best coaching job, at least in the last couple of years?
I can't speak to it to the degree that Tony can, so I will plead the fifth. But I definitely do think this has been a tremendous coaching job by Coach Saban because, a lot of people projected them to win, like the whole thing to begin the year, but the way it started kind of caused some areas of concern pretty quickly. But to see how they weathered the storm and kind of got better week to week, and just the way they handled Georgia, it's been a kind of a miraculous thing to see across the board. Terry Arnold is like the most handsy DB in all the country, but somehow pulls off not getting penalties. But when he does, it doesn't really hurt too much because the next play he may make a play. I don't know. To see him develop speaks volumes just to who the culture of this team is.
Yeah. That's Tony. Did you have another thing on that, or?
This is a team that started a lacrosse player in week 3 of the season. So
that's a good point.
It's like I think that if you look at where they are right now, look at what they were doing in South Florida and what that team looked like against just a not good South Florida team, and they were struggling in the rain. To say that team made the title is insane. And if you would have asked me, is this team going to win a title? On that day, I would have said absolutely not. It's probably gonna. I had him. I predicted him to lose the Mississippi the next week. It looked like that team was dead in the water, and for Nick Saban to kind of rally that team and not let people lose faith and really do the opposite and get so much growth. It was just a heck of a job.
Definitely. I think it's not a bad take to have at all, that it's his best or one of his best coaching jobs with the personnel he had, with where this team was, the improvements they've made, especially the improvements that Jalen Milroe has made. It's a good segue too, because we should dive into some I'll call this housekeeping stuff, because we are in this, sort of weird period for these teams that are in the playoff and in these New Year's Six bowls, where you have a lot of stuff happening transfer portal wise, while you're also trying to prepare for what's the biggest game for many of these team seasons, including Alabama. But before we get into portal stuff, we've had a bunch of awards. We had AP All SEC, and then the SEC awards voted on by the coaches. Alabama had a ton of guys in there. Saban did not win Coach of the Year, even though we were just talking about maybe it being his best job. But I know he's still nominated for another coach's award. There's all sorts of stuff all over the board that these Bama players are nominated. What's y'all's take? I think they had the most first teamers among the coaches all SEC teams, I believe, with 5. And I'll check my own stats on that, because I wrote those articles. But what are y'all's thoughts on seems like well-deserved honors for a lot of these guys?
They just need to name the SEC Defensive Player of the Year award, the Alabama award. I just like it seems like Alabama wins that every single year. No matter how good the team is, no matter if the team's a title contender, it just seems like it's always an Alabama player. So to see Dallas Turner win that this year, it's like it's not a surprise because he's a really good player, but it seems like every single year you've got that. Caleb Downs winning SEC Freshman of the Year, I think, is really big. Just if you look at the future, I mean, I think it's a good reminder that he's a freshman, because I think when you look at him on the field, it's like I've forgotten about Caleb Downs being a freshman a long time ago. He just doesn't play like that. He's like one of the most important players on the defense, and so it's like, oh yeah, this guy shouldn't be doing this. But he leads Alabama with, I think he's got 99 tackles. He's had more snaps than any other Alabama player. Caleb Downs, your freshman safety. So I mean, that's just that's crazy. I think you've got Will Reichert. Could he win a Lou Groza award on his way out? Maybe. But so you just got, there's a lot of good stars on this team. It's funny though, they have all these players, but I wouldn't say that. I know we just talked about those guys. You wouldn't necessarily say that this is like the most star-studded Alabama team. You don't have those guys that you don't have that first-round guy in your receiving core. And Jalen Milroe until now wasn't like, the big time quarterback, until basically after the bye week. And so, and even the running backs, they're kind of split up. So you don't have that 1,000-yard back. So it's kind of, it shows how solid Alabama is as a unit instead of just a few key guys. I think, you're seeing a lot of those guys recognized. It just shows kind of the depth in this team and just how solid everyone's kind of played.
Yeah, that's funny. It's funny how the narrative goes when you don't have a, like you said, first round quarterback, running back, or wide receiver, and you can still be, this great in college and still have a lot of stars. Like, this defensive back room, I think just looking at who was given these LSC awards just once again shows just how phenomenal it is. I mean, Brandon, you talked about Terran Arnold. I mean, he was recognized on the second team, I believe. Do you have a take on, some of these other guys? Maybe, you have some offensive linemen in there, guys that are really holding this team together greatly and do have some potential for sure at the next level. But, it's not a wide receiver, a quarterback, or a running back that maybe steals the headlines or the, national attention the way, people who are in those positions do.
I'll just answer outright to the original question. But,
yeah.
For me, it's actually Tony's point, actually, seeing Caleb Downs back there. And I actually got to a certain point in the season, I said, we really haven't seen any of the class of 2023, like anybody. And there's like 5-star galore, like some of the most talent that we'd ever seen kind of come through Tuscaloosa in one group. And to like not see that group kind of told me at a certain point that they've really pushed the older guys. And although this group may not be as star-studded as in the past, and you kind of start to look forward to next year, even though we're still in this season, and you start to wonder, well, if we didn't see all these names and Caleb Downs was the crown jewel of the group, what does the rest of the group look like once they start to see the field? So, kudos to kind of this older group and generation. Like I give Tyrion Arnold a lot of credit because he originally came out of Florida playing safety, and for him to transition from safety to corner and kind of to take it full force, and to see he's set to be drafted. This was a team that kind of dropped their ego, dropped their pride, and just worked. And so it will be interesting to see how that next group, that 2023 group, but really especially that 2023 group, handles the limelight they had now, just buying into the process.
I'm
also forget when we're talking about that 2023 group, Caden Proctor and the improvements that he's made, because he made freshman All SEC. We're recording this on Thursday, and the highest offensive graded player against Georgia in the SEC championship game was actually Caden Proctor, and he had a really good game. Him along with Tyler Booker, I think that was a really big reason. You talked about some of the running game from Roydell, but I think running behind those two guys, so the improvement he's made from, talk about a guy that was at one time just almost like comically bad, he was just getting beat every single time, to a guy that's, one of the better players in a conference championship game. I mean, obviously we kind of all knew that he was going to live up to that 5-star hype eventually, but it's tough, and all the criticism that he's faced, I think he deserves a big. It's almost easy to do it. Not like it's easy, but it's easier from a mental standpoint to do it when you're Caleb Downs and everything's going right for you, and you start off strong and you just have a great season and you just never look like a freshman. It's really hard for a freshman when you start struggling and you're at a whole nother level that you're just not used to, and everybody on social media is telling you how terrible you are, and you've really never been terrible in your whole life. And now you've got to fix it. So a lot of mental strength to Caden Proctor and just a lot of improvement. And now he's, turning into slowly one of Alabama's strengths. And I think, over the next, you talked about it, Brandon, what is it going to be like next year? I think he's going to be one of the strengths on this team, and when he was definitely one of the biggest weaknesses at some point this season.
Definitely. Brandon, I'm curious. Tony said Caden Proctor. He kind of answered my question already. But is there a guy, you covered this 2023 class recruiting, just talked about him. Is there anyone that you're expecting to see now jump out maybe and follow up this group? And you mentioned they're kind of pushing the veteran guys now. Not to put you on the spot, but anyone you're maybe targeting or we're maybe expecting to be more involved this year that could have that involvement next year.
One player I want to see play is Quay Russaw. I just want to see what he's able to do once he gets on the field. I mean, just seeing him in person, he was like a kid that was very hard to get a hold of. And then once you got a hold of him, it was like, I understand why he was hard to get a hold of. So he's definitely one I would like to see. And then another name that was just kind of like a late steal, but there were, a couple of questions. But Keon Keeley, I definitely want to see how Keon comes out, especially this spring, and performs and kind of takes on that next step as far as not leader, but cementing his role in the lineup. One more player that I like to see more of is Des Ricks. Definitely a guy that Alabama fought for and stole late. Was kind of a surprise. So really, a couple of the key figures: Keon Keeley, Des Ricks, and then I'd like to see more of Quay Russaw. And then heck, if we're throwing in another Alabama in-state player, James Smith as well.
Yeah, I think we'll have an opportunity to see all those guys. And I would throw in Yanzi Pierre, too, another 5-star edge rusher as well. But, if you look at it, they're going to lose Dallas Turner. They're going to lose Chris Braswell. They're going to lose Terrion Arnold. They're going to lose Kool-Aid McKinstry. So you think, does Desrick step into one of those cornerback spots? Do Keeley and, Russaw or Keeley and Pierre, how many of, do they step in as the edge rushers? Quindarius Robinson was on part of senior day, but he's got an extra year of eligibility. I would expect he comes back and takes it. So he's probably going to be the guy that's going to lead the edge rushers. But it's not like last year where you lost Will Anderson, but you already had 2 established guys. You're going to need some of those young players to step in. And so, whether it's Keeley or Pierre or Russell, I think the edge rusher position is going to be really important. And we're going to have to see one of those, 5-star guys step in and play like a 5-star guy.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of 5 stars, that we might see in an Alabama uniform next year, that weren't in an Alabama uniform originally. Tony, I want to turn to you because you had an article. Let's talk a little transfer portal because that is part of the season that we're in. We've got Bama players going in, and possibly some players coming to Alabama. And these aren't any regular schmegular kind of names. These are some big guys that, particularly from Texas A&M, that elite 2022 recruiting class with Jimbo, and now with Jimbo gone, some of those guys going out. Guys you mentioned from A&M in your article, you got Walter Nolan, the defensive lineman, Evan Stewart, the receiver, and LT Overton, who's a defensive lineman. Very disappointed in him that you don't play left tackle when your name is literally left tackle. But that's besides the point. You got Zeke Corral from Notre Dame here. Turquoise Bridges from Oregon were the guys you mentioned. Maybe tell us about some of those likelihood that they maybe end up in Tuscaloosa. What kind of positions maybe will Alabama look for in the portal?
They're all going to be, heavily pursued. So Alabama has interest in, at least I know Nolan, Stewart, probably Overton as well. I think we've talked about it. They're going to need they're going to need to revamp their pass rushing. So let's start with that. We talked about the edge rushers. Nolan and Overton are more defensive linemen, but if you look, they're going to lose probably Tim Smith and Justin Aboigbe. I think, especially if you were to add a Nolan or, really, especially Nolan, but also Overton to a defensive line that also has Tim Keenan and Jaheim Otis, I think you have one of the best, in terms of defensive tackle. I know I always considered, Dallas Turner a defensive lineman, but just from the defensive tackles perspective, the 3 that you'd put out there, I think you'd have some of the 3 best, or best trios if you were to choose one of those 3. So getting an established guy like that as a defensive tackle or defensive end, whatever you want to call it, I think would be, really big. As far as a wide receiver like Evan Stewart, I don't think Alabama needs a receiver, but they're going to lose Jermaine Burton. And if you can get a guy like Evan Stewart who's proven in the SEC, he's going to be a go-to guy, I think then you pounce. But I don't think, you're just going to take a receiver for the sake of taking a receiver. I don't think they need to do that. They don't need to take a project or, like somebody like Tyler Harrell, where, you thought, oh man, this guy could, be really good and he just didn't pan out. They don't need to take guys like that because they've got plenty of depth at that position. But if a 5-star kid that, already has experience in the SEC and has, hurt you in a game before, like Stewart, comes out, then yeah, I think you go after him. As far as, I added Zeke Corral just because we don't really know what's going to happen with Seth McLaughlin at center. I don't think he's going to go pro, but just because he comes back doesn't mean that he'll necessarily, come back at Alabama. I think, he's a guy that has had such an up and down season. He's gone through a lot of adversity in terms of just, you start to wonder, is a fresh start better for him or will he view a fresh start better? I'm not sure that that's the case. I think, it might be better for Alabama and Seth McLaughlin if they, stay for one more year. I think, from Seth's perspective, staying another year at Alabama allows you to kind of like enter the draft with Nick Saban, in your corner and and you still get to train with Alabama and you're working with some of the best and you're going to be on a title winning or not title winning maybe, but like, who knows, a title contending team. And you already have that spot at center. And I don't see Alabama giving away the center role if Seth McLaughlin stays. But if he does think that he needs a fresh start or something, and look, NIL is going to play a part in this too. I mean, Seth McLaughlin, when he leaves, will have, gone to multiple national championship games, probably if they beat Michigan. He'll be on some successful sides. He'll be, the starting center on, a playoff team. There's going to be people that are going to throw him a lot of money. And the money that gets thrown around for NIL is way higher than maybe you would think. And so for a guy that probably has a, 5th to 7th undrafted, grade right now, I mean, obviously he's going to try to improve that if he comes back. But, if you could pick up $500,000 on their way out, I mean, you're going to do that. I mean, this is life-changing money. So it could come down to an NIL thing with somebody like him. So a guy like Zeke Correll, all that said, sorry, a guy like Zeke Correll is a center, top-rated center in the portal right now from Notre Dame. Obviously, Tommy Rees is going to be familiar with him from his time at Notre Dame. So if you lose a guy like Seth McLaughlin, they really don't have depth at the center position because you're going to lose Darian Dalcourt. He's out of eligibility. And then what are you going to do? You're going to make Terrence Ferguson your center. You could do that, but he hasn't played it, and there's not a lot of depth. James Brockermeyer, who hasn't really played, the depth behind him. So it gets tricky. I think you would need to bring in, if you lost McLaughlin, I think you'd need to bring in a center. And so I put Zeke Correll in there just because it just makes too much sense with him, his quality, and with Tommy Rees' familiarity. I think putting him in there. Trequise Bridges, I just kind of took a stab with a name there. Alabama's going to need a defensive back, probably an established one. You're going to have Trey Amos come back. But you're still going to need a cornerback. We talked about Des Ricks, but you really want to start basically what will essentially be a freshman at that position, or do you want to bring in a guy that's more established? If there is an established player in the portal, I think Alabama could bring him in. Bridges is actually a guy that kind of lost his job a little bit at Oregon, but he had, I think, 3 or 4 interceptions the year before. He's 6'3", 198-pound cornerback, but he's the kind of guy that could drop back to star or safety, and he's that big kind of guy. Interestingly enough, he's a Lynette, Alabama native too, and he played on the same defense as Christian Story. So it'd be kind of Christian Story is another guy you might see come back for his extra year next year as well. It'd be kind of neat to see 2 Lynette guys in the same secondary, perhaps, if that was to happen.
Yeah. So some names to watch. Brandon, would you agree that maybe defensive line is a position of need? I don't know if just in your viewing of college football, if there's any guys that you've seen enter the portal that maybe you think Alabama should target as well.
The only nugget I'll add in there is I think Overton was on campus today. I'm pretty sure. A source tipped me off and said he was on campus today with his brother. So
there you go, scoop.
Positive.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. He's not as much of a established. He was playing behind such a great defensive line in Texas A&M. He didn't get the opportunities as Nolan did. His numbers. In fact, he kind of regressed numbers wise this year. But yeah, we're talking about an elite level talent. And another guy, you pair him on a defensive line that has Tim Keenan and Jaheim Otis. That's going to be a deadly, really talented defensive line. And you kind of you're looking for the edge rushers. You're going to have new edge rushers. Whether they're going to be talented guys. But, and Quindarius Robinson will be established if he comes back. But you're still counting on Keon Keeley to make an instant impact. And there might be some growing pains there. So you need to provide the pass rush in another way as well. Having a stud 3 defensive lineman could help, as that edge rushing kind of molds together, having those guys up front will kind of aid in that. And I think getting a guy like Overton or Nolan would be huge. So yeah, he's probably not, necessarily I think if, most fans could choose, they would choose Nolan, but I don't think you turn your nose up at Overton at all. He's a really good prospect and somebody that could be a game changer.
All right. So yeah, both those A&M guys to keep an eye out. I will speak on Evan Stewart briefly too. He's someone I've just paid attention to since he came out of high school as a prospect. I think he's really good. Dealt with some injury problems. I think you pair him up with the Milroe, that could be a really, really dangerous combination. Like a trio or him and Bond in the same receiving room, I think would be fantastic with Milroe around them. But
how about a 4 receiver set with him, Bond, Kobe Prentice, and Kendrick Law?
Exactly.
It'd be like a track relay team. I mean, it'd be nuts.
Fast. He can compete on the return game too, which will be interesting. Obviously, Downs is getting pretty established there, but Stewart's a guy who can return kicks. I just like him. I'm a fan of him as a prospect. All right, Brendan, your turn. because Tony hit on transfers. I'm going to turn to Yusuf for some recruiting stuff. You've been busy. There's been some in-home stuff going on for Alabama with Nick Saban obviously having a little more time on his hands in the last couple of days with not having a game immediately to prepare for. But what's new on the recruiting trail for Alabama in terms of stuff we should look for? Maybe some of these in-home visits as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the biggest things that, like, I guess not in 2024 is that Ryan Williams has some news that he'll come out with the next couple of days. All signs are pointing to that just being a reclassification to 2024, something that was talked during the summer, was talked a little bit during the season, and it seems like it's going to come to a head here in the next couple of days. And that would set in motion for him to decide in February officially, where he'll be going. And there's been a lot of smoke around Auburn, especially because he has, connections with Cam and Perry and kind of that whole crew with Malcolm Simmons and company. But, Alabama's been aware of the situation the entire time. And, I think Ryan does a good job marketing himself, and no matter what the situation is. So, until we see a flip, there's not a flip. If anything, Cam Coleman may have actually hampered Auburn in some of their pursuits in regards to what they're trying to do. And I'll just speak to that. So the Perry Thompson, we kind of talked about this around Thanksgiving. That's starting to heat up a little bit. We saw last night Caleb Odom, who basically kind of shut down any reports that he was going to flip to Ole Miss. And basically locked in Alabama, which I had noticed during the SEC championship that he was very, very locked in. Well, he kind of made the call to Perry last night saying, like, come home, which tells me that, Alabama always has something brewing late. And, just kind of from a source that I have who's very close to the situation, close to Perry, he had mentioned that, he was still in discussion with the staff. I know Perry had actually visited for the Texas game and for the LSU game. So for two big games, he kind of tried to be under the radar and has been a outspoken recruiter for Auburn, but is still listening to Alabama. And with as much love as they've shown Cam Coleman, some can say that he kind of wants that love and attention for himself. And with Alabama kind of still wanting some more receivers in this class, he's the type of player that, they would take if he decided to come back home.
Brenton,
go ahead.
For those that don't know, Ryan Williams, his decision, if he does reclassify, how would that affect his Alabama status in terms of being in this class? Would he obviously be a take as well? Or would Alabama be able to accommodate him a year earlier as well? As basically, would it affect anything on the Alabama end?
No. Like right now, they like there's been kind of the speculation about it, but the staff's been privy to it all along. And so it's kind of seeming like this was their play because, right now with only two receivers committed in the class, Amari Jefferson and then Rico Scott, he kind of fits what they're trying to do. And, I'm anticipating that, that Alabama will lose, a couple more in the portal, potentially at the receiver position. And, to have Williams, you take him. And then Perry would be like kind of if you get him, you get them. And so right now with the class being as low as 20 members, it's still pretty wide open as far as what they can accommodate in this group. Because, again, they're looking to take about 31. So, I mean, we still have some, that kind of like that mix of 5 to 6 spots as far as recruits are concerned. And then if you look at transfers, could push a couple of different spots there too.
Definitely. Things to keep an eye on. Any takes on these in-home visits that Saban's doing with Trey Kirkpatrick Jr.? I know Julian Sainz got one too, and one of those names I know is maybe a little bit more exciting to Alabama fans than the other. But any takes on them?
Yeah, as soon as kind of the coaches were able to hit the trail, Coach Wiggins went West Coast and he visited Woodyard and his family. They're all but locked in. He kind of talked to his mom the other night. She said, she's excited to, just kind of see the journey come to an end. They'll actually get on campus January 15th. She said Peyton's already packed and ready to go, essentially. And then I talked to him just to a couple of exchanges last night. And he just, let me know that, Coach Wiggins had visited him at the school, but that, Coach Saban was going to see him coming up on next week, and that he's, 100% locked in. For him, he's just been kind of focused on, enjoying being a kid for these last few weeks because he's the type where he's like truly a pro quarterback and is straight to the point and it's all business. But for him, he's trying to be engaged where he can. Obviously there's a few more targets still on the board, like an Aaron Hampton who there's a ton of smoke around as far as the Texas commit and kind of his interest in Alabama. Coach Saban was there last night. Yesterday morning at Dangerfield. So I think Saban, I think saying, staying firm to his commitment, is kind of calling all the troops in as far as the offensive side is concerned. And, Alabama having success in the SEC championship, Alabama making yet another college football playoff, you're going to see the dividends of that labor fall in the recruiting path one way or another. So, there's a couple of names here and there regarding flips and just uncommitted prospects where Alabama's most likely going to have the last laugh.
Definitely some things to keep an eye on there, especially with saying maybe some smoke around the Texas commit there as well. Tony, I'll finish with this with you. We've got some, hopefully a lot of names coming in the door, as you and Brandon just both eloquently illustrated. But let's talk about some guys going out the door, both on the players and the coaching staff. You mentioned the lacrosse player, Mr. Buchner himself, is departing. But perhaps the most significant transfer portal entry for Alabama, Ja'Cory Brooks recording this on a Thursday, so he entered today. So relatively breaking news. And then on the coaching staff as well, Coleman Hutzler, the outside linebackers coach and special teams coordinator, departing for Mississippi State. So some maybe holes fill. We kind of talked about how Alabama would fill it on the players' perspective, but with Hutzler gone, what's y'all's take on that? And then Ja'Cory Brooks, especially being one of these transfer portal entries here for the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, well, we'll start with Ja'Cory Brooks. I think it's just kind of we kind of all saw it coming, right? He saw his role just diminish, and then he hasn't played what is it, since like the Arkansas game or something like that, with his shoulder injury. But he's just been kind of a guy that, nobody really knows what happened, because last year he was one of Alabama's biggest weapons. And he was a guy that I think a lot of people thought was going to be Alabama's number one receiver this year. And possibly I even saw some noise about him being a second round or maybe late first round pick if all things went right. And to go from that to a guy that has 3 receptions all year is kind of crazy. I don't necessarily know how missed he'll be at Alabama, just because they've gotten on without him. They really haven't had him much this season. I do think that he'll be a good, he's got talent there. We saw it last year. And, unless there's something just major wrong with his shoulder that, would hamper him next season. And once he gets totally healthy, I think you're getting depending on the level of team he goes to, a number one receiver, or if he goes to a contender or, a ranked team, I think a high number 2 receiver, a guy that's going to be a really impact player. So, that's a big one. Isaiah Hastings also went in the portal. He had 4 total snaps over 2 years, not necessarily somebody that Alabama is going to miss, but he'll have a chance to go to another program. They also had Tyler Jones-Bell, another guy that's just kind of stuck around for a while. I mean, Tyler Jones-Bell has been on this Alabama team for a while. He was actually had a medical issue, so he wasn't really with the team this year. But so those are your 4 right now in the portal. If you start looking at other possible guys, I don't like to speak for players, and you don't really know how things are gonna kind of shake out. We mentioned that Seth McLaughlin might have a decision to make. I mean, if you look at some of the other players that just haven't really looked. I haven't really had the opportunity to play. I mean, I talked about, getting Odom, getting a tight end. I mean, you got Miles Kitselman, a guy that really hasn't played much with the current tight ends. If you're bringing in an elite tight end recruit and Miles Kitselman only has 1 more year of eligibility, is he a guy that leaves? You know what I'm saying? You look at guys like that, Monkel Goodwine was a really good, an elite recruit, hasn't really had an opportunity. And you look at some of the guys in the defensive line that you'd probably right now put ahead of him. You talked about James Smith getting more of an opportunity. Well, I mean, that's a guy that's probably ahead of Monkel Goodwine. So does he think about leaving? And I don't want to speak for these guys because, I mean, I don't know what their thought process is. But when you're looking at this, you start looking at some of the players that really haven't had an opportunity, and you look at some of the young guys or the guys that, Alabama's bringing in. If they're going heavy on a position and they got some like big time recruits, you start having to almost kind of do the math. And for me, when I'm trying to like guess, I guess, you start thinking, what would I be thinking if I was in this recruit's shoes, and is the best opportunity somewhere else? So we'll see how it works out. I think, I mentioned some guys that I think Alabama might expect to lose. I think we talked about NIL. You never know. I mean, Alabama didn't expect to lose Javian Cohen, and he wanted a certain NIL that Alabama wasn't going to give him, and Miami did. So, I think that there could be players like that. You might lose a guy, especially some of these 5-star kids that you just don't want to lose. Are you going to be able to convince Keon Keeley or Yanzi Pierre that they are going to play? They probably will, but I mean, there's going to be people that are going to be offering them huge money and maybe a guaranteed starting role. Does a guy like Rydell come back? Does that, does that influence what Justice Haynes or Richard Young, 2 big-time recruits that have already waited their turn, are they going to have people in their ear saying, look, you can make this much money and start right away at school X? And, is that going to happen? So Alabama is going to have to try to, convince a lot of these kids that, there's an opportunity, or that, maybe they'll have to pay them in order to get them to stay. But that's kind of the world we live in, where it's like, it's not only the guys that haven't, been able to perform to the level to get on the field. It's also the guys that are young and, maybe the future of the team, but they don't want to wait. And there's people still ahead of them. So it's going to be some crazy times. I expect, I don't know which one, but I expect there'll be at least one, that just the way this works, there'll be at least one person on that leaves Alabama that Alabama will be hurt. Like that, obviously it's never great to see anyone leave, blah, blah, blah. But like, there'll be at least one that will probably really sting for Alabama. That's just the way this goes. I mean, I couldn't tell you who it is, but it's hard to hold on to all these elite talents. And, I just don't see anybody doing it. It's not just an Alabama problem. It's every single roster in America has to worry about this.
Definitely. Brandon, you have a last take on that before I have a way to end this. Normally it'd be predictions for the next game, but we can't do that. They don't have a game next. So I do have a trivia question for you guys to end things off. But if you have any quick takes on the transfer portal,
go ahead with the trivia. Go ahead.
Trivia? All right.
Who's Oklahoma State playing their bowl game?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That'd be a good trivia.
They play.
We need Brandon's prediction.
A&M, they're in the Texas Bowl.
Oh, yeah, I'm definitely going with them now. Definitely.
They play Texas A&M Texas Bowl.
Well, I actually might go with Oklahoma State over this. Just first-time listeners to this pod are going to be really confused why we're wrapping it up by predicting Oklahoma State.
We're an Oklahoma State pod.
But,
it's a new bit.
Yeah, I think Brandon, this might be your chance. Your Cowboys are going to be able to pull this one off.
I just wanted them to get it done. I didn't think
we'll
they would pull the Wisconsin.
They'll be playing all 25 members of Texas A&M.
Yeah, there are 8 players that they have left.
They got to do 8-man football bowl game.
The game's on December 27th, so we'll let Brandon do a prediction later down to keep the bit going. We'll do it the episode before they play. That's when we'll get a prediction from Brandon for his Cowboys.
I'm cool with that.
I'll ask you guys this: Alabama-Michigan. I'll find some more trivia to do as that game gets closer too. But for now, what year was the first matchup between Alabama and Michigan? Give a guess.
Oh shoot, I looked this up, and now I don't know. 1936.
Okay, Brandon.
It's not there. It's.
He went so far down, so I'll go 1953.
There was one, so you had, I think there's I'm gonna try to do the math in my head because there's 5 of them, and then you had
70s.
I'm gonna give you guys each one more guess. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. I'll go 1973 then for sure.
Okay.
I want to be in the 70s anyway.
Okay. So I'm trying to do the math. You had the one with Brady, then you had the one.
Tony specific. Oh no, he's in the memory bank.
Citrus Bowl's the most recent. The one before that was the one with Robinson in AT&T, and then you had the Brady one, and I think there's like 2 more before that. I'll up it to like 65.
1988, January 2nd,
Wow.
in the Hall of Fame Bowl.
Wow.
Michigan won 28-24.
Yeah,
in Tampa, Florida.
Yeah, there's been a lot like since the
they've
2000.
never played at one another's home stadium. They're all
I can easily see
games.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I thought that was pretty wild. They've never played before 1988.
The only one not in the bowl game too is that one I was talking about in Dallas, right?
Arlington, yeah. Alabama won 42-14 in 2012.
Yeah. That's the only one that
sounds about right.
That Brady one was crazy though. It's like the one where like didn't they like lose on a missed extra point or something like that?
It was 35-34, so
I think they lost in overtime on a like missed extra point, which is like looking like which is probably like foreshadowing some like
record hasn't missed in 2 years.
Not even.
Yeah,
could be due.
I'm just saying like
all right.
Foreshadowing struggles like
oh sure
that Alabama had faced before Riker, so
sure. Yeah. Well, we'll see. But we'll keep recapping. We'll be back next week. But that'll do it here for Tide Pod this week. Some housekeeping stuff. Hope everyone enjoys. Everyone have a relaxing week. You don't have to stress about an Alabama game. So there you go. You can just enjoy the week off. And take it easy. Keep an eye on all of Tide Illustrated stuff, especially with the transfer portal. We'll be updating that all the time with how active it'll be. It's like 3,000 players in the portal. It's crazy. But yeah, with that, half
of them are actually from Texas A&M, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, right. All one roster. They will be playing 2 players against Oklahoma State. But yeah, so keep an eye on all that stuff. We'll be back next week and see you guys next time.